Welcome to the next episode of the Empower Your Essence podcast with our guest, Jesse Wild. And cheesy pun, it was a wild episode. It was fun. We got deep and it was beautiful. We go from electromagnetism of humans and the earth and grounding. We go through cold plunges and chillblains. We go through the subconscious mind and the power of it through flow states. We talk about the Four Agreements book. We get into the dichotomies of the universe and life and the light versus the dark and how you can interact with that in life. And we get into Jesse's passion, which is getting people unstuck that are in dis-ease or discomfort. He's very passionate about helping people find solutions and really get back to their authentic selves. So he does that in a lot of his one-on-one coaching. He does group events as well. He takes people into really cold water in Park City, Utah, where he lives. He also does public speaking as well. So he's a beautiful soul, a very unique individual. Joe and I had a blast having him on, so I hope you enjoy. And at the very end, he takes us through some breath work as well. So if you want to get a state shift and check that out, it was beautiful. If you see me, if you're watching this come out, I'm on cloud nine. So enjoy the episode. Thank you for being here and giving your time and sharing that with us. It means a lot to us. We're so grateful to have you listening, and we hope that it impacts you in a positive way. Have you guys heard of the documentary Earthing?
I have heard of it, and I have not seen it.
I started watching a little bit of it last night, and it was pretty mind-blowing. It's like, I've heard about grounding from a spiritual sense a billion. I've lost count, but they're actually bringing some science into it, and that where all of us have shoes and we're literally insulated and cut off from the earth, from like the natural circuit that walking barefoot gives us and heals us. It's pretty wild, man. It made me think of that when you were talking about this.
What's cool,
very similar concept.
I'm not sure what specific grounding technique you take all your guests through, but I feel like I might have an idea. And I talk about two things when I do this grounding exercise with people. I, number one, talk about the magnetic field of the earth. People are typically pretty in tune and aware of, or took a class and did second grade where they played with magnets and iron filings, and you can see the thing, and they've seen a photo of the aurora borealis and these bits of energy, these waves of energy coming from the sun and hitting that magnetic field and creating this beautiful color scheme. And then I talk about the electricity within our bodies, which is the communication system for everything that happens. It's biochemistry that results in electricity in our body. And this is how our entire nervous system operates, right? It's just these little electrical impulses through the body. And when you're talking about these things in physics, they're not separate things. There's not like magnetism and electricity. It's electromagnetism, and how those two things are two parts of the same thing. And then I bring them into this grounding thing and imagine connecting. But as I go through my day in my office here, the very first thing I do is take off my shoes.
Nice.
I'm always barefoot, man.
Yeah, man.
Exactly. Oh, yeah.
There we go.
3 peas in a pod.
There we go. That's cool.
That was hilarious.
And totally not planned.
And important. I just, man, it really shifts.
Yeah, for sure.
How I feel in a space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I one of my favorite times to do some grounding in that way is right after we've gotten a fresh snow. I'm up in Park City, and so it's mountain town and Olympic training centers here. People come from all over the world to train, and so you walk through the grocery store in the wintertime and see like the Russian bobsled team, the Swiss bobsled team, the Jamaican bobsled team. People
Nice
are just,
reference.
we get a lot of snow. And so I get so stoked when there's a fresh snow, and I pull my socks off and I go walking around outside in the snow for a while. And it's such an interesting feeling to feel the snow between your toes. And it's cold at first. And when you first try it out, you're like, no, I gotta go. And after time, you can build up a tolerance to it and come to like it. You start craving it. Like, oh, this is awesome. So after skiing yesterday, we pulled off on the side of the road. There's a river that runs down the canyon. And there was this little pool that I could get into. So the water that I was hanging out in earlier that day was snow up on the mountain, right? It was freezing cold, but it's so energizing and rejuvenating.
Heck yeah, man. Yeah, it's like grounding combined with cold plunging.
Cold plunging. Like. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Two of my favorite things. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So good.
I got a chilblain. You ever heard of a chilblain?
No, tell me about a chilblain.
It's wild, man. It's from cold plunging or cold exposure.
Yeah.
Whether you have poor circulation, it's almost like if you have like normal healthy skin and then you have like frostbite. It's like somewhere in between. I'd never heard of it. And and it's like one of my toes on my left foot, because we all do cold plunges.
Yeah.
And I have my little cold plunge, and my second biggest toe on my left foot was getting all red and itchy. And then it got a little purple and a blister, and I'm like, I thought it was like a bug bite. And then I thought it was athlete's foot or something. And one of my friends, she's like, I think it's a chilblain. I'm like, a what? Yeah. And it's chill, BLAIN, and it's like when you just have poor circulation and you've been exposed to cold so much, it's like it starts to become a wound because it's not getting normal circulation. So I missed my cold plunge for a while because I had to heal, and I have these like tiny little toe booties I got now. So just today I went back in the first time in a while. I was like, God, I miss it, man. Like, and I know you teach that stuff. I want to get into that at some point today, maybe, because I know you host events and stuff, and you take people
absolutely
through that. So
it's Wim Hof I saw first in Colombia, like ski outerwear company. They had this commercial, and it was probably right around 2010. And there's this woman who's talking about their new jacket, and it's got this special lining in it, keep you extra warm while you're out in the cold. But meanwhile, you like pan down, and Wim Hof's just in like an ice fishing hole. He's just hanging out. They're like, this is Wim Hof. He has his own thermostat. But if you're anybody else, buy our jacket. And I'm like, who is this guy? And pretty quickly, I saw him in a TED Talk. And they got this plexiglass deal, and they're filling it up with like ice and snow. And he's just sitting in there, and they go on and on about. I'm like, who is this crazy person? And also, I'm a little inspired by him. And I heard just more and more about him, but also more and more about these supposed health benefits. And I was intrigued. And it was a handful of years ago. I'd recently gone through a breakup that was rather upsetting, and I was doing Thanksgiving a month later with a friend in Denver, and whatever, chill morning, spending time in the YouTube hole, and came across this video of this girl doing Wim Hof stuff. She's planning to go to Poland where Wim Hof was. She was incorporating the help of these guys. She had this in her like mindset, I'm going to do this thing, and made it happen. She brought it to fruition. She manifested this. And I'm watching this thing. I'm like, this is crazy. And I'll go down and show my buddy coffee. I'm like, dude, you got to check out this video. And he's told me he's played around with cold water a bit. And he lives in Denver, right? So it's almost December. You look up at the mountains. They're covered in white. It's cold. And there's this big park with a reservoir and this big dog park that he'd take his dog Rufus to. So we're getting ready to take Rufus to the dog park. And he's got board shorts on and a beach towel over his shoulder. I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm going to get in the reservoir, man. I'm like, that's cool. I'm gonna watch and see how it goes. And the moment I said that, there's this thing in the back of my mind that was like just grabbing at me, and I'm like, do you have an extra pair of board shorts? Like, I don't know if I'm gonna do it, but maybe I should be prepared. So we go to the dog park, we're hanging out, we take Rufus around, we're chilling, and we've got this internal dialogue, like, should I do it? Should I not do it? Is this crazy? Am I crazy? And we're getting close to being done with Rufus at the dog park, and afterwards we're going to go over to the reservoir side of the park, and we pull up, and it's cold, man. Like, I'm wearing a down coat at the dog park. The water isn't frozen yet. And I'm like, okay, I think I'm going to do it. Like, teach me the breathing technique. What's the secret? He's like, you just walk in. It's just water. And so I'm like, okay, we strip down, board shorts. Okay, let's do this thing. Walk in the water. And my body's freaking out. It's like, right? Losing all control. We're in the water for like 23 seconds before he's like, I'm going to get out. I'm like, that's the right idea. We walk out, we kind of run out of the water, and we're sitting on the shore, and he starts breathing intensely, like this hyperventilating kind of thing. And I'm like, are you okay? What are you doing? He's like, yeah, I'm just doing this breathing thing. I'm like, okay. So he does this breathing thing. And then next thing I know, he's going back in the water. I'm like, the hell's wrong with this guy? And I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, maybe I should get some new friends. But he went in, and he was so much calmer the second time. He was in for a few minutes, and I'm like, maybe I should go back in. And so I intuitively set a timer on my phone for whatever reason, went back in, and one of the things he had shared with me before we'd done any of it is keep your hands out of the water. He's like, if you put your palms in the water, you're going to have to get out. So keep your hands on your head. I'm in the water. Okay, it's different this time. It's still intensely uncomfortable. And I can look over at the landscape. I can see the snow off top of the 14,000 foot mountains in Colorado, and I can kind of connect with them. They're cold and I'm cold, and it's just okay. And I was there for a while, and I'm like, okay, sweet. I'm doing this thing. And then I got curious about what is the deal with the hands in the water thing. And so I put my hands in the water and instantly had to get the fuck out of the water.
Yeah.
So I ran out of the water and checked my phone. I'd been in there for 4.5 minutes.
Right on, man.
Yeah. And that was the introduction to it. What I've found with the ice bath stuff, the cold exposure stuff, is that there's a tremendous amount of health benefits. And it all seems to stem from me at a mental, emotional place. It's the root. And the people I've noticed who become also intrigued and develop this habit, they tend to do it when they're at a point in their life where they're experiencing a significant amount of pain and discomfort.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
that lines
I've got
up.
some empathy with that. Yeah, that's
yeah. It's like 99% of the time the story.
Yeah, like, otherwise, why the heck would you get in that cold water, right? Like, why would you?
You're like, I'm already in pain, like whatever. Yeah. And I notice it in my own life, right? When I'm experiencing more levels of discomfort, I tend to gravitate towards the ice bath stuff. And when I'm feeling like pretty good, I'm less inclined to seek that experience.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. I appreciate you sharing that, man. That was a great story.
Sweet. Also, like, I don't know if I should be cussing or not.
Oh, totally. We're all about cussing.
Okay, sweet.
Yeah, we.
I don't think it happens enough, if I'm fucking honest.
Yeah, cool. Fuck yeah.
Instant rapport.
I was just gonna say that, man. Double rapport.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you. That was tons of fun.
That was tons of fun. I love
this stuff, man.
It's just such a simple way to connect. It's just breathing. I love watching Wim Hof stuff. This big like convention room people. He's taking them all through this breathing exercise, like 1,000 people in there. He's up on stage. He's like, "Just breathe, motherfucker," and it says "motherfucker" up on the screen behind him. But it's just breathing. He's like, "Just do what your body's capable of doing," and like, of course, it is.
Oh, it reminds me of what you said about getting into the cold water. Your buddy's just like, it's just water.
It's just walking into water.
Just get in the water. Yeah.
It turns out things in life are only a big deal if you make a big deal out of it. Otherwise, it's not.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting, the things that we choose to make a big deal out of or not, right? Like something. We talk about this a lot in one of my psychology groups. The woman who runs the group's awesome. She's mid-70s. She's been in this coaching position, working with Native American medicines for 30 plus years. And we're regularly talking about our response to people in the world around us. And what commonly comes up is, if I walk into a room and there's 3 people there and I tell a joke, well, one person thinks it's the funniest thing they've ever heard. Another person's like, and the other person, the third person's massively offended, right? And the question, well, who's right?
Right.
Everybody.
Right. Everybody, because we're just responding to the world around us in ways that mostly we don't know how or why we're doing it. We've just always done it.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It is very interesting. Yeah.
It's fascinating. I think it's a huge part of what I've gained from like the coaches and people mentors I've worked with, and so much of what trying to give back when working with people is just that perspective that we have that agency to choose. We have that agency to create our own story, or not create a story around something that's happening. Yeah, that's an option too.
I love that word, Joe, agency. It feels in so many ways synonymous with empowerment, and anybody that I choose to work with, the goal and the mission must be empowerment by way of becoming aware of the things that I'm not aware of that are driving my habits, my behaviors, my strategies, my ways of thinking, the things that I don't even know that I do. And until I can take responsibility for my response to the world around me, I can't make any changes. And if I'm not willing to take responsibility for my response, then I'm giving literally my power away. But what I'm lacking, what I observe so much in our modern world is that people have a lack of agency, right? They don't have this internal ability to be the creators of their own world. They go, this thing happened to me and this person did that thing and it made me feel this way. Not recognizing that that person just is, and it was me who made me feel this way, with all of the positive intent of the world behind it. But it goes back to that joke. Was it funny or was it offensive? Is kind of beside the point. What is my response to the joke? And why is my response? And in that way, it's not my job not to walk around the world being overly concerned with whether I've triggered somebody or not. What seems more true to me is my responsibility is not that. My responsibility is taking on the obligation of understanding why I was triggered. What created that? What is it from my past? Something in my lifespan or something that happened with my ancestors? What is it about that experience that makes me respond in the way that I respond? And am I responding in a way that seems favorable, or would I like to respond in a different way? if I'd like to respond in a different way, if I would like to feel less offended by the world around me, it's my responsibility to find out why I'm triggered and then either do something about it or not, right? But it's not my responsibility to not trigger somebody, mainly because I'm not in charge of anyone else's response. I can't predict accurately how somebody will respond. I'm thinking of a time when it was after skiing, we're hanging out. It was probably about this time of year. The sun's out, everybody's hanging out, talking about how cool their day was, what the sweetest trick or the sweetest run they did was. Saw a friend, went over, talked to this friend, and a friend of hers came up and she's like, hey, this, I don't remember the girl's name, said, hey, Sarah, this is Jesse. And that girl immediately goes, nope, turns around and walks away, because apparently she had a not so excellent experience with a Jesse at some point, right? So there was a triggering by her nervous system in association with my name. It's not my job to not, I'm going to change my name because she feels triggered. I don't think so. Right. But we don't have control over what the world is going to do around us. We do have control, potentially, of how we respond to what the world does around us. And I say potentially only because it requires a deep sense of awareness, of what is happening in my subconscious, in my unconscious, in a way that I'm not aware of until I am. And then the moment I become aware, now I potentially have the opportunity to do something with it, to rewrite a new program or start practicing a different habit or strategy. But this is a favorite saying of mine from Carl Jung, is until we make the unconscious conscious, it'll rule your life and you'll call it fate.
That's good.
Yeah.
That is brilliant. I'm curious, man, where did you learn that? Everything you just shared, it's a beautiful perspective. I think the three of us share, but a lot of people don't. Where did you pick that up?
That's a great question. I don't know.
Right on.
And, I know I don't know, but if I did know.
Yeah, right. There you go.
it's everywhere. And I first started becoming aware of these things probably in my teenage years, hanging out in the woods with friends, climbing up in a tree and exploring the world of psychedelics and weed, and looking off at the land. Like it was the DARE program, right? The DARE program was like, here's these things, don't do them. And we're like, well, why do you not do them? And then they described what the effect is of doing them. And I'm like, well, now I want to try. And I distinctly remember a very close friend. We've been friends since the 6th grade. And we were probably in 10th or 11th grade. And we'd got our hands on, we had marijuana quite a bit, but we got our hands on some psychedelic mushrooms. And we're like, we should climb this tree. And we climbed up this tree and we're looking over this landscape, and there's like a playground and a jungle gym, a swing set, a tennis court, a building and fences and electrical poles. And we thought we're going to like have this far out experience and like colors and, visual things. And we just had this deep feeling. We're like, oh my God, all of these things are hurting the earth, right? So very early on at that moment, I'm like, okay, there's something different about the world and the way I experience the world. And we go through cycles of up and down and things that drive us, and tried on a lot of different costumes in life. And when I really deeply started becoming invested in learning more about human behavior, it was around 2013. My high school sweetheart and I, we had gotten married. We started dating in the 10th grade. We'd been together at that point for half of my life. I'm 32, and we started dating around 15, 16. And this was not my idea, this divorce, and it was utterly devastating. And I do my best not to use the word hate. There is a friend of hers who I deeply disliked, and what was funny is that friend had given my ex-wife, my still wife at that time, a book, and my wife at the time had moved out of the house into live with this friend because we just were not getting along. So just, very shooken up about life and don't know what to do and feeling lost and lonely. And what I typically would not have done is grabbed a book on the bedside and read it before bed. Like, that wasn't a habit of mine. But I'm like, I'm going to read this book. And I open it, and the first thing I see is a note from this person who I deeply dislike to my wife. And I'm like, ugh. But whatever. I read it anyways. And that book was The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And most of the time I talk to people about this book, they've encountered it, they've read it. It's been a simple and short yet powerful book for them. And occasionally I'm surprised that somebody hasn't. But that book is really what kind of slingshotted me down this trajectory of learning about human nature and behaviors and the patterns that we run and the strategies that we run, and so much of it being unconscious, and how do I use my words, and recognizing that words have a tremendous amount of power behind them. Am I taking something personally or not? And if I am, why would I? Because nothing anybody ever does is about me. It's always about them, right? Yeah, it's that was where it all started, and from there, I don't know how many books. There's many, many, many books. Many hours spent in YouTube. Many hours drifting off to the lovely voice of Alan Watts. And
love Alan Watts.
The more you pay attention to something, the more you see it all around you, right? There's these truths that seem to be inherent throughout all of life, and so it's perpetually reinforced day by day everywhere I look. There's another quote that's not mine, but I really like it and use it all the time, so maybe it is. It's a Wayne Dyer quote that goes, "When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change."
Yeah.
So now I see it everywhere.
Yeah, it's in your unconscious. What was not in your unconscious or conscious now is you're unconsciously aware of it.
Consciousness. Have an awareness about it.
Been made known. Yeah, that's really stunning.
Absolutely.
Unless
you have something to say, Joe, I was going to ask him another question.
Yeah, I was interested actually in just asking that question too about your community. Like at what stage of your life, or like what was an impactful like shift in your community into being led into this type of thought, or the inner life, being engaged in that way?
Yeah, the answer is kind of all over the place. There's two places that I'd like to go to with that question. Number one, my parents were hippies. They graduated high school, and I think right around 69, maybe 70, but right around that time, 69, 70, 71, like there's some things changing in the world. And some of my earliest memories are hanging out in nature. I grew up in Western New York, in Buffalo. There was this big gorge, this big ravine, just lush, like deep as greens. I've brought a lot of people from out west here back home to Buffalo, and they're like, holy crap, how is it so green? And you pull up to this parking lot, you hear this rushing water coming down through this big massive ravine, and it's an interesting landscape. It's all shale, so it's very, very old, like 400 million year old land that's being reorganized by this river that's coming through. And where you used to have a swimming hole last summer that nobody could touch the bottom, now it's completely filled in, and there's a new swimming hole somewhere. We go hang out at this wilderness area like every weekend, and it was me and my family, and like I don't know, 100, 200 other people, and nobody had clothes on.
Nice.
It was
I
just
love it.
like totally nudist hangout spot. And even into the early aughts, I'd still see some old timers remnant from that time hiking around. They got their shoes on because the shale's like razor sharp,
Right.
you know,
Gotta have
cut
the
a
shoes.
toe. But they got their backpack full of their gear and whatever they're going to need for the day, and just like sans clothes, no clothes at all. Total birthday
I
suit.
love it. I love
And
it.
so there's an influence there, actually, from maybe even before I'm born, with my parents participating in this hippie kind of mindset.
Yeah.
And then also, throughout the 80s and 90s, maybe stereotypical, the nation seems to be very celebratory of partying and alcohol. And I'm watching movies about college. And when I went to college, I set out to recreate Animal House. And I succeeded. Like, it was totally good. Yeah. And throughout my 20s, like, it's the weekend, it's Friday, it's Saturday, let's party, let's go drink, and you know, let's get totally like dazed and lost. And I'm going to go back to this time of divorce. World completely flipped upside down. I felt like that scene when like the roadrunner is out on the cliff and something happens, and or the coyote's out on the cliff and the roadrunner does something and the cliff disappears, and then you're just like suspended, nothing to grab onto, you start free falling. It's terrifying. And some of my community there were a few close friends that didn't drink very much. They didn't smoke. There was a guy in particular, he had spent a lot of his life traveling around the world at punk bands and head to toe tattoos, mohawk, always a different color. And we would end up going skateboarding a lot. It's like Friday night, we're just going to go to this parking lot and skateboard. We're going to build these ramps, and we're just going to skateboard. And what are we going to do after? Well, we're going to go like see a movie and have nachos or whatever it was. And that community, it ended up being really supportive in a way that to this day, I don't think they know how. Because my habit, my strategy, my way of doing life was, it's the weekend, let's get shit-faced. And now all of a sudden it was like, oh, we can have fun without alcohol. And I really didn't realize that until I was, 33.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing, man. I didn't know that about you. And I was gonna ask a whole different question, but
Sorry,
I'm gonna
derail.
No, not at all. No. You just inspire me, because if I was listening to this, I'm organically curious, and I'm thinking, especially if I didn't know any of us and I was listening to this, what was that like at that age, being exposed to like nudist gatherings? Like, that must have been such a trip.
I mean, it wasn't, because you didn't know anything else.
Right.
It was just super normal.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing looking back on it, because you learn later on that, oh, this isn't what most families are up to.
Yeah.
But in the moment, like, you're 3, you don't know anything different. You're like, it's just this is what everyone's up to. And I'll share this. I've had some experiences with psychedelics in the past, and I'll be out in the desert. There's some spots where you can go, you're not going to see anybody. You could hang out for like months and not see another person's face. If you were to have an experience with psychedelics and go to a city park and take all your clothes off, you're going to go to jail, right? Because somehow this is intensely offensive to the society that we live in. But you find the safe space, and I'm always like, clothes are oppressive, I'm taking them off. And I'm just that guy meandering through the desert naked.
I love it, man.
I'm sure it's a callback to those early years and feeling this deep root of authenticity. I'm like, no, man, we're like, cover them up and we're going to hide who we are. And it's shameful, right? Nudity, shame. I'm like, no, it's not. Clothes are
Yeah.
oppressive. They also help keep you really warm in the winter when that's important.
Yeah. There's also
There is
utility.
there is utility and function in that. But I
Yeah.
really appreciate your answer and the scope, like just showing us a few of the different communities as well. I just have realized in my own life and others just how impactful those different communities at times in our lives, and especially the switching, the pivoting in between um, styles of community. Like you were explaining, in your early 30s, meeting a group that you were very deeply connected with and was nourishing, but we're doing it in a different way than you'd ever experienced. I mean, I think,
Yeah.
so much of our learning comes through contrast. And we're ultimately social beings and communal beings. And ergo, like so much of that happens in our community. And I think it leads me back to like that agency kind of conversation too, just realizing that we do have choice around the community
Yeah.
that we're in and what shapes us. But it's fascinating how that plays in with the community we were raised from. Like I love the
Yeah.
your answer to the question about the early nudities. Like it wasn't weird because it didn't have perspective at that point. Like maybe not perspective at that
Yeah.
point, didn't have other experiences at that point. Like that was the
That was
norm.
it.
And that's that's the framework that we all come from. There's so many that start out with something that doesn't serve them.
Yeah.
And then like later looking back, like it's okay to look back on that and choose other. It doesn't mean it was wrong. It doesn't mean it was right. But just getting perspective on
I
that. Love
love
it.
yeah, and thinking about how we only ever have our own experience, and as much as I'd love to know somebody else's experience and spend hours or days or weeks or months with them asking questions to find out more about their experience and their interpretation of the world around them, we'll never know. We'll only ever know our experience. And for so much of our lives, until we start having some of these thoughts that bring us out of ourselves, we assume that everyone else's experience is the same, right? We see somebody doing something different in the world, and we're like, if I were them, I would have done it differently. And no, it's not true at all. If you were them, you would have done exactly what they did, right?
Oh, dang.
Right.
That's so
That's
good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Their life experience is informed by all of the things that their ancestors passed to them. All of the things they experienced in their early life, from their unconscious perspective of how to insert whatever thing here. It means that anybody who's sitting in a prison right now, if I were them, I would have done the same thing. So much of their thinking, choices, behaviors occur at an unconscious level with some kind of positive intent behind them. Right?
Yeah, that you just reminded me of. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, if I were them, I would have done the exact same thing because I would have been them.
Yeah. Yeah, this is like uplifting my soul right now, this part of the conversation. It reminds me of, have you gotten much into Michael Singer's stuff, Jesse?
A little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's Untethered Soul, right?
Yeah. That's like his main one. Did you ever read The Surrender Experiment? It's like kind of like his autobiography. Dude, you love it.
I'm gonna
it's
add
so
that to this.
Good. It was a life changer for me. And he talks about, I think for, I don't know, he might still do it. I'm not sure, but at least for 30 years, I think he taught mindfulness in prisons. And he got to go, apparently it was a notable, like a lot of people, he doesn't share the name to respect the guy's privacy, but like most likely if we were to know who it was, we'd probably know who this, or if we heard the name, we would know who this person is. And like a very bad man. I know we're all taught in NLP, there's no such thing as good people, but it's like, you're not your action, like, you can change what you do.
Behaviors.
And he's talking to this guy. It's just like bad, just evil. And Michael Singer came from an approach very similar to what you're saying. Like everyone is just like, I want to punish you, and like you are other and you're the enemy, and like and Michael Singer's like, I don't condone what you did, but I want to understand you. And like he just sat with the guy of like, okay, you did what you did. Like, everyone has a reason for what they do. And like most people think they're doing something good or to feel better, like however odd that may seem to other people. And he said that this criminal in solitary confinement was like, you're the first person that I ever felt saw me.
Yeah.
And Michael Singer's are like, I still don't agree with you, but like I am seeing you and like honoring that. I think to your point, like you did what you did because you're you and no one else is you. So how can we know what your experience is? It's so subjective. Yeah.
There's
I think it's brilliant.
Two things that pop up from that story. Number one, Michael Moore, regardless of how anybody feels about Michael Moore, and I think that there's some people that really love Michael Moore stuff and some people who really dislike it. There's a documentary called Where to Invade Next, and I forget the country, maybe Norway, Sweden. There was a mass shooting, and there was a gentleman who went to some island and took the lives of many teenagers. And they had a scene from the hearing for this gentleman who's being sentenced, and people are like, you suck and you're terrible and you're awful, and he's just sitting there stone faced like whatever. And then one of the fathers of one of the boys whose life had been taken stands up and starts expressing a deep level of forgiveness to the man and the man starts breaking down into tears. That's what got the response. And so just last week, a friend was at a sentencing for his brother's murderer. It was about 2 years, I think, ago now that his brother was murdered over some interesting things, but neither here nor there. The sentencing was last week, and he was sharing his story with myself and some other friends. And family members, it's kind of the same thing. Like, here's this person, and you screwed up, and you ruined this. And he did the same thing. He expressed this level of forgiveness and level of like, I can't understand. And his full intention, if this gentleman will allow it, is he plans on visiting him in prison and developing a relationship and just getting to know more about who the person is. And some of this stems from his own experiences with jail and prison in the past, and some of it stems from his education and becoming a therapist, and some of it stems from these kinds of conversations that we're having right now about how people are not their behaviors, and in any moment in time there's a murderer in each one of us with the appropriate set of circumstances. And this goes into then the Jungian, Carl Jung inspired shadow self. And what are these deep, dark corners of my being that I ignore and I'm refused to accept the truthfulness of? And that's where so much of our healing internally happens, is when we stop denying aspects of ourselves. We tend to want to, and the culture that we live in tends to want to be like, here's the light, you are the light, you're nothing but the light, and if you're anything but the light, you're bad, right? And that judgment ends up being really unhelpful for all of us, because the truth is that we're both. We're the light and we're the dark. We're the positive and the negative, right? We're the heads and we're the tails. And our culture is trying to get us to just pick up half of that coin. They're saying, pick up the positive, pick up the light, pick up the heads. But you can't pick up a coin and just pick up half of it.
Right.
You can't pick up just half of a coin. You have to pick up the whole thing. You have to embrace the wholeness and the truthfulness of it all if you're to be able to feel the wholeness inside.
I think I think too, like that's a beautiful part of viewing the world that way. I didn't see the world that way for probably until about 7, 8 years ago. And, sometimes I still slip and fall for sure. Like, or I'm like, I'll forget that
Yeah.
beautiful phenomena, I think, of our human existence. And I come back to that. And I think that is one of the birthplaces of intimacy, honestly, is honoring that in ourselves and others. And then we're way less judgmental, and it creates a beautiful bond that in some ways can be unbreakable.
That's right.
Oh man, I'm almost getting emotional. Like that means a lot to me. I really share that belief.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really
I
appreciate
mean, and yeah, go ahead, Joe.
No, I was just, that's such an exciting topic because it is so foundational, I think, to understanding and loving ourselves first. I mean, I think that's something we try to do for, community with our family, like accepting and appreciating others. But that's really
Yeah.
impossible to do if we haven't learned how to do that with ourselves yet. And without that understanding of there being two sides, of there being the shadow self, you can't fully love yourself if you don't love that side too.
You
And
must love all
so
the
many of us
parts.
don't know that even exists because we haven't sat with it. We've always been told that that's other or that's bad. And if if we show up in a way that is, society feels is counterproductive, like we're acting out. Not that that's coming from an actual legitimate part of who we are that's trying to be heard, that's trying to be understood. And that process of stepping into that, sitting with that, being with that shadow, being with that other side of ourselves, not only transforms our relationship with us, but as soon as that happens, like back to your quote from Dwyer, like everything we see around us also changes. And this allows a space for other humans to be themselves and for you to accept as that. And I just think that has been such a pivotal part of my growth and learning that. And it's so neat to see that reflected in your life and in that story.
Yeah, what I hear and what you're sharing there, it takes me right back to the Four Agreements, and one of the topics talked about in that book is about not judging. And it was at some point I was really excited. I was feeling really good about the fact that I was going through the world doing far less judging than I ever had. And I'm like, oh, cool, so good. And there was this particular instance that I'd noticed myself judging people over and over and over again. And I didn't notice it until I did notice it. And then when I did notice it, I'm like, I'm judging. And I started really judging people for judging people. I'm like, oh man, they're judging. Right. And then also down the line, years later, I failed to see that also the fact that I was feeling like really good about not judging, that the good is also a judgment, right?
It is.
We tend to think about judgment in negative terms, but to judge something as good or to judge something as not good or bad, it's the same thing, right? And you cannot judge somebody in the world unless you feel that within yourself, right? So anytime we notice that we're judging somebody else in the world, we're only judging ourselves. We're seeing that person is reflecting back to us some aspect that likely resides in our shadow that we don't want to admit is true and honest. And they end up telling us that it is. We cannot judge somebody in an area that we don't experience within ourselves. And so I think about that all the time, right? We tend to think about judgment and talk about judgments on the negative spectrum. Yeah. And it's also true for the positive spectrum. Yeah. Things are neither good or bad, they simply are. And based on our experience, based on the story that we tell ourselves, the unconscious, the subconscious story that we don't try to do it all. And in fact, the more we try not to do it, the more our unconscious is giving us this story. And it just sounds like this internal dialogue inside our head. And it changes the way that we see and feel everything because it creates a filter of maybe positive, maybe negative. And it informs the way our unconscious creates a story that's got so many holes in it. It is just the furthest thing from the truth. But yeah, it brings it all back to the Four Agreements for me.
Man,
Love that book.
It is.
Oh, Joe, go ahead.
No, I was just that book has been so transformative, and I think it was just so surprised because, and you mentioned this already, it's brevity. It's very accessible, a very short book, and it has transformed how I look at myself, how I look at others, and just given so many insights. And I think like it was a neat experience in reading it. It was just like Dustin and I have talked about this too. It's like the experience of almost like a remembering, you know, it's not like you're learning, you're something like, oh shit, that's how this is supposed to be. That's, you know, like it calls to something inside of me that knew that was the way it was. And I just chose another, stepped away, wasn't reflecting that. And just like, it invites you back to participating in the world in that way. Out of love, out of acceptance, not in a state of judgment. And and then just realizing the lessons, as you've mentioned too, lessons that can come from your own judgment, because you beautifully put, like, anything that you're picking up in somebody else and you're saying and judging them, like, that seed is in you. Like, that's the only reason it's lighting you up. And just how consistently that's still a trainer for me. That's still a lesson.
Right. Same, dude.
Earlier this week, I was lit up by somebody and how they were showing up, and I'm just like, God, I can't believe they're choosing to use their voice in this way, choosing not to stand up. And it was just later that day, it was just this huge awareness of that in me, and I was just like, whoa, I am so angry at myself. And I just didn't see that. So I was projecting it onto somebody who's currently showing up in that same energy. And I was just like, man, just took an opportunity to sit there and love that person, forgive first me, and then them. And I'm just so grateful that they're in my life. Whereas hours before, I was like, I wish I was never around this human, you know? And it's like, I'm talking about me. I was talking about me.
That's right.
I didn't want to be around me.
And how can you escape yourself?
Yeah.
Ooh,
right.
Yeah.
And the more we can pay attention to or be curious about those projections. How am I projecting what I seem not to be able to hold at this moment onto the people around me, and be able to also recognize that I can't judge them without judging myself. And the moment I do judge them, what I'm doing is judging myself. How do I create an awareness there that I'm doing that, remove the judgments, good or bad, so that I can take a step back, be able to see myself better, allow myself, give myself permission to merely be who I am, my authentic self. That's the key, man. If I'm ever going to find forgiveness in my heart for somebody else, if I recognize that I'm carrying unforgiveness with me, like it's a vial of poison that I'm going to give to somebody else, it's just me. I'm waiting to give it to me. I'm holding on to it. I'm giving it to myself right now. And in order to really, truly be able to forgive, we got to let go of that judgment.
Amen. It's like, you're expecting to poison someone else, not unconsciously poisoning yourself.
Yeah.
And so, dude, this is so much fun. I want to ask you, Jesse, because transparency, authenticity, vulnerability, and however that shows up for each person in the space we create on this podcast. Like, Joe's like, I slipped up last week. I slipped up with Joe like 2 to 3 weeks ago. Full transparency, man. Like, I teach this stuff. Like, we all teach this stuff. And it's like, I finally came around, and it's like part of the beauty of this podcast, or like whether it's your business or the groups you lead, or Joe in real estate, or me in coaching, or whatever it is as humans that we do to expand and create and manifest, like, we're tested and we slip, and it's like, oh, cool, thanks, I get to grow even more. Didn't see that was around the corner, but like, cool. And like, there's a few big things in my life that led me to discover this way of being. But I want to ask you, what tools, habits, like inspirational moments, like what shaped you into really embodying this way of living? Because of all the people I've met in my life, though I haven't had a lot of FaceTime with you, in the grand scheme of life, you seem to embody this in a way that I've rarely seen. And Joe and I actually talked about that. So I'm curious.
Thank you.
What your thoughts are on that, man.
My first thought about slipping up occurred yesterday. We were at the ski resort. It was a great day. We're having a good time. And there was a couple of things. Andrea, my wife, she kicks my ass going up hills. So if we're like doing some kind of a hiking, backcountry skiing is oftentimes referred to as touring. We'll go touring and it's going uphill a lot. And she just kicks it's so easy for her and it's so much work for me. And so we've had some conversations about like, hey, if we're going to do this thing together, let's do this thing together. And we're hiking up this hill, get to the highest peak at the resort. And I'm like hot, I'm sweating, it's sunny out, I need to take my gloves off and my helmet. And she's like, just whizzes past me, hikes up. And the whole time I'm like, fuck, like, we fucking talked about this. Oh, you want to tell me to hike up the hill with you? Like, yeah. And so I'm like, what a dick. And so I get she's already up to the top and I come up and she's all happy about being up there. And I'm like, think that was a dick move. Right. And so instantaneously, I'm like, please forgive me. But then not too while longer, we're like in one resort, we got to get back to the other resort. We're taking these like little path through the woods, over the hill and through the woods. And our daughter, Sophia's 10, kind of got off trail a little bit. And I saw her and I knew that she would be able to find her way. I was pretty certain of it anyways. And so I pulled over and waited for her. And then Andrea pulls up and I'm like, hey, did you see the little dinosaur in the woods? She got off trail. And then she left. And I'm like, why can't we do a group thing? And like, I'm calling Sophia on the phone. I called her like 13 times. She didn't answer. She finally shows up. I'm like, hey, I called you like 13 times. She's like, I know. It was work to get the phone. I'm like, no. And like, so I started getting all worked up. We're waiting in line. Like, she wants to go here. She wants to go there. They're having a fight. I'm like, what's with the high maintenance? I started throwing all these like pieces of energy and frustration and anger at them and like really just needed to be able to hold them. To answer your question more deeply, I think I started learning a lot of this way of thinking outside of just myself or how I'm just one piece interacting with all the other pieces. I think it came from some psychedelic experiences that I had early on. Right. But what those experiences, I don't think get talked about enough in this modern age. Is I think they're becoming more and more popular. Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, his Netflix series. There's changing legislation in all sorts of cities across the nation. Like I think over 30 cities, they've decriminalized psychedelics. There's some talk of them legalizing them for specific uses at the federal level. The way they're being talked about, I think that there's a key component they're missing the mark. And that is that, like the rest of our Western world, we want some kind of a pill that just fixes the problem for us. And they talk about psychedelics in the same way. Like, I have this problem and I'm going to have this experience and then it's going to fix my problem. And it doesn't. It just shines a light into that shadow, into that corner that I wasn't willing to look at, which is why sometimes people have pleasant experiences and sometimes they have really unpleasant experiences that sometimes people will call a bad trip. But a common theme is that people who have a bad trip under guided supervision in the right environmental setting, they still tend to feel like, wow, that was a massively important experience. And they might want to explore that deeper at some other point in time. Again, I cannot express the importance of somebody there who's not under the influence of these medicines, somebody who has deep experience with these tools, being there in the most appropriate environmental setting. You still have to take those learnings and incorporate them into your everyday. You need to be able to recognize where I'm running some kind of a strategy that's unhelpful. Maybe it was really helpful at some point in the past. Maybe it was really helpful when I was 7 or 4, but no longer is it. So I need to develop a new habit, a new pattern, a new strategy. And some of the things that have helped me the most with that, mental emotional release, neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis. They're all avenues that, quite honestly, we're all organic computers that run programs. And the programming is what our subconscious is. Our subconscious is our programming. And we were talking about the Carl Jung thing. Consciousness is just becoming aware of what's happening all the time already. So what is happening in the background? What is happening in my subconscious? What are the programs being run that when this, then that? And there's just this instantaneous, this equals, and having a way to be able to work with the subconscious and be able to create some pretty instantaneous shifts in beliefs, in thoughts, in habits, in ways of doing it. How do I change my habits? How do I change my beliefs? How do I go into the root of my organic computer, my programming, and start running a different program? Anytime there is a change in our lives, a way of a pattern, a habit, a strategy, a belief, it always is a change that happens at the level of unconscious. The question is, have I been curious enough to become aware of some things that I'm doing that I ought not do? And then do I have a methodology to be able to strategically create some of those changes? And there's a lot of ways to create changes. And Joe, you're usually in Denver, and Dustin, you're in LA. If I wanted to go to either of those places, I could just, pack my bag and step outside the front door and start walking. And there's so many different ways that I could get to either of these places. I go to Denver, maybe I stop in Steamboat. Maybe I head up, to Cheyenne, Wyoming a little bit first. Maybe I dip down to a little place called Aspen, where the beer flows like wine, if you know what I mean.
Nice Dumb and Dumber reference. I love it.
Right. If I'm going to head out to Los Angeles, maybe I want to go through Vegas, stop off in Death Valley, or maybe I want to go up to Tahoe and stop off at Like, there's so many ways I can go, and I can walk there, and it'll take forever. And that's a way of doing it, and that's perfectly fine. And also, if I knew and took the time to learn how to drive an automobile, well, that would get me there a lot quicker, especially if I had MapQuest. Or I don't know if you guys remember going to AAA. Back in the day, they'd have these things called triptychs, and you go to the person working and you go, "Hey, I want to drive to Buffalo, New York." And they're like, "That's cool. Here's the triptych." And it's this long thing, and they would have a stamp, and they flip through it, construction. They knew where all the construction was in the country. Don't know how they knew that. But maybe I just hop on a plane and I get there in an hour. There's a lot of ways to get there. And the more ways I know, the more I can choose which path is right for me. And there's trade-offs, there's pros and cons to all of them. But all of the changes happen at the level of your subconscious. And the more you have an awareness about what needs to be changed, the more empowered you are to create that change.
Amen. So it sounds like the mental emotional release, the neurolinguistic programming, the hypnosis, and the psychedelics are kind of like the airplanes. Is that right?
Psychedelics, breathing work, cold exposure.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're all part of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And whatever the best cocktail is, there's almost 8 billion people on Earth, I think. And so that implies that there's almost 8 billion different ways that are going to be the best, because it's so individualized.
Yes.
Yeah, that reminds me, I thought of this earlier actually, when I was in the Himalayas in India and did my first silent meditation retreat, and I was I was like a newbie, right? It was a whole different world, and this guy was teaching a meditation that he learned from a monk in a monastery in Nepal. And it was very similar to what you just said. He's just like, the meditation is like essentially, if you take all the people in the world, the billions, all the animals, all the consciousness is the sentientness of all the other beings, and take all of their other rights, correctness, subjective truths, and realities, and compare it to your one, you are so hilariously not the most important set of opinions in the world. It's bonkers, right? And I think that's kind of what you were just saying, right? It's so true. Honoring that piece, honoring that individuality.
So at the beginning, I mentioned Alan Watts. I love Alan Watts. Spend hours listening to him. He's bright, he's intelligent, he's witty, he's well-studied, well-read, and he's British. So instantaneously, he just sounds smart. So that's helpful.
I wish we had that.
And my overall theme for anybody who hasn't spent any time listening to Alan Watts is like, doing a deep dive into history and theology, the existentialness of the universe, and how essentially nothing matters because of that grandioseness that you were just referring to. And also, because I'm here having this experience, and I see what I see, and I hear what I hear, and I feel what I feel, and I think what I think, the only thing that matters is me.
Yeah.
Right.
Dichotomy, man.
That dichotomy is so real. Like in that way, I'm literally the center of the universe, because anything that's happening anywhere in the universe is happening from my perspective. Right. And if there were another living being across the universe, or even like astronaut fly up to moon, in that moment, they're the center of the universe. And I'm just this thing that's far off on that blue planet. And the way I think about this, the analogy that comes up regularly for me is that the ocean, right? All the drops of water that make up the ocean, there's an impossible amount of drops of water that make up the world's oceans. But even if we're just going to label like this specific one, we go from California to like Japan or China, like there's across the Pacific Ocean an impossible amount of drops of water. And you can take a drop of water out of that ocean, and the ocean doesn't stop being the ocean. So in that way, that drop, it just didn't matter. But it does, because all the ocean is those drops of water. So it takes all the drops of water to make the ocean.
I love that, man. I love that. And I think that ties so much in what we were saying before, what Joe was talking, we were all talking about, is that honoring of other people's decisions, behaviors, all that stuff. And like what comes up in me, I think it's another layer of that same dichotomy of like, right? It is a dichotomy, and it's humbling, it's inspiring. I think it can be confusing to the conscious mind at times, but I actually thought of this. It just hit me out of the blue last week. I was telling a friend that was sharing some quotes. She's writing a book, and she was sharing some really, really good quotes. And I had thought this like on the drive before I saw her. And I was like, you know what I just realized? Most of my favorite quotes I've ever heard, whether it has to do with spirituality or, business, whatever it is, relationship, life, it's usually a dichotomy, even in the words they use. Wayne Dyer, the one that you shared, you just flip the words, and there's so much truth on both sides, and it's like mic drop. Oh, so much growth and wisdom there if I act on it. I love that, man. You just got me so excited by what you shared.
Things are only a big deal if you make a big deal out of them. Otherwise, they are.
Yeah. Oh, true. Another dichotomy.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Joe, do you have any other questions for Jesse? I got plenty, but I want to
Not
honor
specifically
both of
right
us
now.
in
I
this.
just I'm so
Yeah.
intrigued by the dichotomy, like kind of conversation, how that's come up, and it's a really new awareness for me. I think relatively recent in just how powerful it is to notice how consistently what I am struggling with or what I'm learning, like it's showing up in a dichotomy. Like that's where the friction comes in. And I mean, I think it's really funny how long I was being introspective and looking and never saw that, you know, and then just like, it's such a, I think it kind of goes back to even what we were talking about with the shadow self, just the realization that there is two sides. There's the totality of what we are is all the tiny pieces, and they do matter. And yet so does the whole. Like just that understanding of the polarity of the dichotomy in life is so powerful, and it continues to be something that like I'm learning from and getting joy from now. I think that's a neat shift too, is like as you start to realize that that's where a lot of the lessons are. That's where a lot of the what we used to call friction, and what I'm learning to see as like lessons, as opportunities. And instead of like anger showing up, instead of frustration, like having joy around that, getting to choose options, because we have it. I think just as you were discussing too, like the more modalities we learn to see these things, the more agency they have with those options. And it's really neat to these discussions are an opportunity for that too. Just broadening that understanding, that acceptance, those pathways that might be out there, and the reality that there's around 8 billion ways to do this that are perfect.
That's right.
That are as they should be is maybe a better way to say that.
And in that frame of context, that there's 8 billion and you're one of them, I'm interested to know more about your experience or interpretation of joy and friction.
Yeah. So they very often run very parallel in my life. I found like my opportunities for joy have been incredibly connected to where I either currently am feeling friction. And what I mean by friction is discomfort for me. Some piece, some situation that is at the boundaries of how I've seen myself. Like they are causing me to stretch, I think is another way to say that. Like just it's outside of my ideal comfort zone. But in that experience, it's giving me options. Like friction itself is giving me opportunity and giving me cause to look at another way to show up, another way to see it, another way to sit with it, another way to even accept myself. And I think that's been really empowering. And I've talked about the joy a bit before. Just I think joy is for me is an experience, but I realized early on in my life that it was a choice that I could choose to see a situation as joyful, that I could choose to show up in joy regardless of the situation. I think that's been such an empowering realization. And obviously the more, like any muscle, like anything, the more you do it, the more you're practicing, the more like robust it's become. But it's been such a haven to an energetic place to be when experiencing friction, when experiencing confusion or other, which is so common in life. Like that doesn't, I think I don't know, just this image of me as a child or children in general, like showing up. I think I often hear a common thought about adult life being something that is just pretty clear, pretty laid out. You know, I remember being 8, 9, 10 and just couldn't wait till I was an adult and things made sense and things were just linear and you just did what you needed to do.
Uh-huh.
That time hasn't come. I don't think that time doesn't
You mean
exist.
the arrival hasn't come
The
yet?
arrival of this
Still coming.
simplicity and exactly. But the beauty of the journey and the beauty of like being able to experience all these different things and still choose joy, still choose brightness and openness and receptivity. And joy is really connected to receptivity for me. Allowance of what is has been life altering, and so that continues to be a huge modality that I go back to, that I encourage. That it.
I want to try this on for you too. So recently, I've been diving into a bit the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism. And they're talking about suffering a little bit, but then talking also about thirst or wanting or desire or even just experiencing joy, and how, if I understand this mindset accurately, the joy will always lead to suffering. And so then, because we're talking about dichotomies, what comes up for you as it relates to joy and suffering, and how we may instinctively find ourselves judging or having one outweigh the other as good or bad?
Were you? I'm sorry. Could you restate that question? I think I missed the.
Yeah, that's cool. My question is about if there is some truth that joy leads to suffering, this Buddhist noble truth, and I'll explain a little bit further why it's suspected to be that way, is because everything will always change, and at any point we're ever experiencing joy, we can't hold on to it. So we'll experience it, but it'll be a fleeting moment and it'll go away, and it'll lead us then back to suffering. And so my question is about joy and suffering, and if one is better than the other, if there's some judgment there or whatever comes up for you. I'm just wondering your thoughts.
No, I love that actually. I think that's a really neat way of talking. What I was trying to explain before is I think they're so inherently connected. I love that description of dichotomy for those, because I think they're part of the same loop. And as I experience joy, that opening, that welcoming, that expansion inherently creates that friction. It brings that struggle. It brings that next opportunity to then choose joy again, to then lean into that. And it just becomes this amazing spiral. I mean, I do think it's a dichotomy and like kind of the loop, but it's spiraling upwards. Like it's been such an expansive experience for me, and continues to be. And I think they are both so necessary. And I love that. I love that question and that openness and how you ask that too. And I think that's where the growth continues to be, is by not choosing one or the other, because you can't choose one or the other.
Yeah.
Like they are together.
That's right. It reminds me a lot of flow states. And right. So the reason somebody would seek out a flow state or seek out an activity that leads to this being in this moment of flow, this in the zone, a way that I've heard described from the flow research guys is basically, if alcohol makes you feel this and cocaine makes you feel this, and all the different drugs have a different biochemical makeup as it relates to how they affect the body. A flow state apparently is a natural way of experiencing all of them simultaneously. So maybe that's described as joy or ecstasy or something different, but it requires a whole set of circumstances in order to be able to be in that moment of the zone. And we think that like getting to that moment is the entire goal, and each step of the way almost has to be. And the flow states, as I understand it, is there needs to be some kind of a challenge. And moreover, there needs to be some kind of a challenge with a consequence. there needs to be some kind of a stress related about that potential consequence. Then there's this letting go of whatever the consequence might be. So be it. Let's just let go and do this thing. And then you can find yourself in a flow state, and we go, man, I finally did it. I finally arrived. I'm experiencing the biochemical cocktail that we call flow, right? And most people don't expect the final stage of the flow cycle, and it really screw with you if you didn't know about it. The last stage is recovery. And recovery looks like, feels like, sounds like depression. And so people go from putting in all this work to have this level of height, right? And I got sun-kissed on the mountain. You have this level of heightness that experience. I remember the first time I tried to do a backflip on my snowboard, there was so much buildup, like years of buildup, and finally did it. I finally felt like I've arrived, and nothing in life is ever going to be the same because everything tastes sweeter, right? And it doesn't last. And then you find yourself in this place of like, it's kind of like suffering. Like, what the fuck? Life was so good, and now it's not. Just knowing that that's going to happen is helpful. You're like, oh, okay, I'm in this place. And just like everything else, this too shall pass, right? And I can move back into this cycle. But the only reason that doing a backflip to this day, even though I've been doing it for decades, still feels good, exciting, gets me that flow of biochemistry that feels so good that we seek out, is because it's scary, because there's this potential consequence, because I know that before I take off of the lip of that jump, I need to be able to let go and just be like, you got this, like, just go do it. And then you find the flow state, and afterwards, like within a day or two, it's going to be recovery. Be like, what's going on? What's wrong with me? And it's just part of the deal. Like, I need to embrace all the steps on the path. I need to just be okay being here now on the path wherever I am.
God, I love that. You just kind of tranced me out, Jesse, in that question and that explanation. I'm like, I've heard of the flow state. I've never heard someone talk about what you just talked about the way you just talked about it. That was so neat.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, man, that was pretty wild. I mean, I've heard like little bits and pieces said different ways, but you just, I think for anyone listening, like, that is a profound truth of the human experience that most of us in our culture are not taught about. And it's almost like we're like that hamster on the wheel for whatever our next fix is. If it's a goal, if it's a tangible thing, if it's a, whatever. And I still find myself, as I was exposed to that probably 7-8 years ago, still trip up sometimes, still get caught up. And I'm like, oh, wait, come home. Because that home, the space between suffering and joy. And I think there's also another interesting concept of joy versus happiness. But just to keep it simple right now, suffering versus joy. If I unconsciously or consciously find myself trying to move away from suffering, and oddly enough, retreats, I'll find myself doing that unless it's a really spiritual one. And I'll be like, oh yeah, all this good stuff, rah. And then I'm like, wait a minute. And if I start just chilling right around this space, I feel more joy inherently and more joy in the suffering inherently by just chilling out in the middle and loving both. Yeah, man, like, I think this is big. This is a really big thing. Very, very empowering.
It's just loving what is.
Loving what is.
It's loving both sides of the coin. It's loving the light. It's loving the dark.
Circle. I love it.
True love must be unconditional.
Can you elaborate on that?
I'm sure it can.
Would you like to?
True love must be unconditional. I need to, if I'm going to love life, I need to love every aspect of it. I must love the negative and I must love the positive.
Yeah.
I must embrace the spectrum completely. Otherwise, I'm creating conditions about love. I think about it, I feel like this aspect of love will come up a lot when I make that statement. And we'll think of somebody who we really don't vibe with. We're just not on like the same energetic plane. The things that we value are vastly different. We have dramatically different opinions about what ought to be and what is. And I might really not, from my perspective, appreciate the way somebody else does something. And even in that, I do my best to still have love for them, to recognize that I don't know what it's like to be them. I don't know what it's like to have lived their life. I don't know what it was like to be born into the world with their set of circumstances and parental guidance, or just adult guidance. And I still want the best for them, even though I don't agree with them on a damn thing. But true love is, to me, the connectedness of all things. It's recognizing that one drop in the ocean isn't better than another.
Yeah.
They're just different.
Yeah.
That one wave in the ocean arises maybe for the sole purpose of being able to see the rest of the ocean from an alternative perspective. But the bottom of the wave isn't better than the top of the wave. The bottom of the wave gets to see the top of the wave. The top of the wave gets to see the bottom of the wave. It's all this dichotomy.
Yeah.
So not loving one side of the dichotomy is not loving, but loving that there is a dichotomy and that everything seems to be capable of broken into zeros and ones. It's this and it's that.
Yeah.
That I must love what is unconditionally if I'm going to experience true love. Otherwise, I'm just experiencing a fraction of it. I don't know if that makes sense. Does that make
makes
sense?
total sense. And to me, the way I would kind of paraphrase that, if I could, because that was said so eloquently, is there's a really big difference between liking and loving. And I cannot like you, but I can still love you, and I can still be present with love in the space and not like what you're saying and doing. Big difference, right?
Absolutely.
I love that. And I like that. And I just had a deja vu. Whoa, that was wild.
Cool.
I love those.
I haven't had one in a couple of weeks. I love it. That was so sweet. Oh, man, what a cool spot to have one. Yeah, man, I really appreciate that perspective. Joe, any other thoughts? I'm wondering if we kind of get to a beautiful point of starting to kind of wrap this up and letting people know where they can find Jesse.
No, I think that'd be great. This has been so much fun to connect with you and just have an opportunity to mirror and bounce our ideas and see each other's souls. I just really appreciate that. The invitation, the welcome, the sharing of your story, where you are, what you've seen, and just thank you so much for continuing to be you. I'm just like, it's such a joy to continue to learn from other humans.
Yeah.
And,
thank you. I was so stoked when you guys reached out about this.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I would absolutely love that. Truly. I was very excited when you guys reached out about this and this opportunity. You're both such magnificent souls, and to be able to take this time and connect and share these ideas and however it is that we can connect in the future. I love these conversations, and I'd love to have more.
Same here, yeah. Where can people find you? We didn't get into much of what you do, but I did want to let people know that I wanted to share this, and I think this is a cool thing that you let us know, is that your passion in life is to help people that are stuck in pain discomfort, or dis-ease, and to find a solution to their problem, which is essentially getting back to their authentic selves. Is that an accurate statement?
That's
of your
a completely accurate statement.
Right
We're all our own worst enemy, and the solution to the problem is often much more times than we realize, incredibly simple and found within. And so my obligation to myself and to the world is to help people find where they're stuck and where that's creating this pain or this discomfort or this dis-ease, and help them to be able to find the solution to that problem. And that problem is always going to be a problem that's within. The signs and symptomology that we experience in our bodies, pains and tightnesses and discomforts and disease, it's all a signal of us trying to warn us of something. So maybe akin to the check engine light on the dashboard of your car. If there's something going on with your car, it's a signaling to let you know that it needs to be addressed. And if we were to just take the light bulb out because I don't want to look at the light bulb, it's going to lead to some pretty major problems. But all of those things are just for us, created by us, for us, so that we can warn ourselves or signal ourselves about something that we ought to pay attention to, whether that be physical, mental, emotional. If there's a problem in the universe, there's also a solution. So I'm working with people to help them find what that solution is for them at that individual level. And they can find me at my website, jwildmethod.com, email info@jwildmethod.com, or I'll probably start doing more posting to my Instagram. I do a little bit here and there and know that I ought to do more. jessewild.ma is my Instagram handle.
Love it.
Beautiful.
And I can't thank you gentlemen enough for inviting me for this special occasion on this day. It feels so connecting, and I'm in deep gratitude.
Thank you, man. Same to you.
Yeah.
Sending love to you both. I love doing this. Joe, this is just so much fun. Jesse, it's been a pleasure. You're so interesting.
Yeah.
You guys
and
are. I can't wait to learn more from both of you. Thank you.
Right on.
Thank you.
Let's do some Wim Hof inspired breathing, and when we do retention, we'll run through some grounding.
I love it.
Okay,
all right,
cool.
Sir, take it away.
Okay, sweet. So we're going to start by, as you probably already know, deep inhale, and I'm going to adjust my camera a little bit so we can deep inhale through the stomach, into the chest, into the head, and just kind of letting it fall out. We're going to start out really gently. We're going to increase the intensity of it. We're going to make it one thing. We're going to increase the frequency of it. More intensity. More frequency. And then we'll slow it down. Take a deep breath in. Hold it. And then let it fall out. Deep breath in. Gently hold. And let the tiniest bit out. Feel your feet touching the ground. Knowing that there's that energetic connection in your body that mirrors in the exact opposite the energetic connection of the earth. Feeling your feet, that energy connecting down as far as you go is absolutely perfect. 5 feet, 10 feet, 15 feet, 50 feet, whatever it is perfect. And allowing that energy to start charging up through those connections into the bottom of your feet. Letting that energy move through your feet, past your ankles. Filling up your lower legs, moving past your knees. Filling up your upper legs completely. Letting it get to the level of your hips. Knowing that that energy comes from infinite source, go ahead and let your breath out. Let your breathing return to normal. As you allow your subconscious to do a scan from the top of your head throughout your entire body, knowing at that level of unconscious, that level of subconscious, if there's any energies that you need to move out, negative energies, into the earth's surface, where the earth can take that negative energy and recycle it into something positive that you can use in the same way that we breathe out carbon dioxide and the plants and the trees breathe that in, and in turn give us oxygen that we need, that we can breathe in. In this never-ending cycle of symbiotic relationship, allow your unconscious mind to do a scan from the top of your head down to the tips of your toes, searching for any energies that are no longer serving you, and allow them to fall out as you allow your unconscious mind now to bring up from the crust, from that energetic field of the earth, any positive energies that your subconscious knows will be serving of you today. Allow your unconscious to do this, and allow your unconscious to know that all of these energies come from an infinite source and can never run out. They're continuously flowing. And then take a moment to allow your unconscious to create any new powerful beliefs that you'd like to manifest, that you'd like to embody. Any positive statements, positive energies that will serve you now and in the future. Go ahead and do that now. And in a moment, we'll finish the practice with 3 deep ha breaths in through your nose, big audible ha breath out your mouth. The bigger they are, the more you connect to the world around you. Take that first breath now, deep in. And again. Last one. Let your breathing return to normal. When you're ready, you can open your eyes and come back into the room.